Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our friend, Ezra Klein!
You know, I can hear you back there. I know that was staged.
Well, Ezra,
Also, your high fives are super loud. Do all of your hands hurt? It sounded extremely painful.
I told them to scream really loud at every answer. Thank you for coming out, Ezra.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So
What are you all doing here? It's like a night. You should be out doing stuff. What are you here for?
Is it a Wednesday? It's Wednesday night, isn't it?
I don't know.
It's Tuesday night.
It's been a long
Wednesday.
week.
Okay, hump day.
It's Tuesday? No.
No, it's Wednesday, isn't it?
It better fucking be Wednesday. If it's Tuesday, I'm
week, too.
leaving. That's not. There's been too much week.
So, hey Ezra, thanks for making it out here. Really appreciate it. We always like to start our Startup Grind interviews all the way to the beginning. So, where were you raised? Where were you born? Where were you raised? What did your parents do? And perhaps maybe talk about your first political experience.
Ooh.
So let's go with you.
All right. I'm from Irvine, California, which is a suburb in Orange County. We did not call it the OC. That is a thing that happened later and was very annoying if you lived there because it changed the name of the place you were from. Orange County also is not a cohesive county. It's a bunch of cities that do not relate to each other very well. So it was strange because now people know where I'm from, but what they know about it is completely filled with lies. So I'm from Irvine. My father's a mathematician. My mother's an artist. Trying to remember what the other questions were here. My first political experience?
Yeah.
My
Political
mother,
rally, maybe?
Yeah, so my mother volunteered for Bill Clinton's 1992 campaign. And she put up a table at the Target nearby because I grew up in a suburb, so the local landmarks are like the Target and the Mervyns, and so we had a table at the Target, and I was sitting there handing out bumper stickers to people for, what was Clinton's Putting People First?
I'll put it first.
That's what it was, yeah. Irvine, by the way, later became, oddly enough, a strange hotbed of blogging people. So Kevin Drum, Cal Pundit, is Irvine. Atrios was at UCI as an economist for a minute. Tyler Cowen, who runs Marginal Revolution, was also at UC Irvine for a bit. Hugh Hewitt, I believe, lived in Irvine, if I'm not wrong. I know another important blogger, but he's pseudonymous and it's a secret, so I can't tell you who it is. But he also grew up in Irvine.
Yeah, a lot of bloggers. Hey, before we start, hashtag Startup Grind at Ezra Klein, right? Twitter?
Don't at me.
You don't have to.
Don't at me. I don't
2
check.
million followers, too.
I don't check ats. I think it's poisonous to your brain. I'm not kidding. I think it's I think it's really bad for you. Don't look at your ats.
Who's your favorite? Who do you follow on Twitter that you like?
Ooh. I actually believe my wife, Annie Lowry, is like the world's greatest tweeter. She, unlike me, who's a boring user of Twitter, although I like new 280 character Twitter because I'm special and have the beta. And it allows me to write long, boring things. And since I'm not funny, that works for me. So it's increased my usage of Twitter like 10,000%. But because I'm not good at writing short jokes, I've hated Twitter until like 25 minutes ago. But Andy's good, Matt Iglesias, my colleague, is good. His Twitter's a little too hot for me. It plays it too close to the edge, but that makes it more fun to read than mine.
You know, it's amazing how you say you talk about bloggers and journalists, right? But you know, when you were at school, you didn't actually want to become a journalist, right?
I didn't think about becoming a journalist. So I went. My official bio here that he read omitted this, but I went to UC Santa Cruz first for 2 years, and then UCLA for 1. And I think of myself primarily as a banana slug. And wait, is there someone from UC Santa Cruz? Yes. Also, I never get to do that. Is there someone from? So that's great. Nobody's ever from Irvine. Nobody cares if they're from Irvine. So I applied for this student newspaper at Santa Cruz, City on a Hill Press, to be an intern there when I was a freshman, and I got rejected. So I had not really had an intention of becoming a journalist, but also it did not seem like a career pathway that was open to me. And I started a blog just pretty randomly, but back then blogging not only did it not have anything to do with journalism, but it was like the opposite of doing it. I mean, it was hated by people who did journalism. A lot of it was critiquing journalism. I'm trying to think of it was like trying to become a fireman by becoming an arsonist. Like it wouldn't have made any sense. Although I guess people become cybersecurity experts by being hackers, so maybe that's good. I knew where the holes were. It's actually true. I did know where the holes were.
So subsequently, you actually got hired by the Washington Post, right? Which inspired the Wonk blog, right?
So I got a fellowship. So I was blogging for a number of years, and I was a blogger when the sort of first wave of blogging began to really hit. So you could be not very good, which was how I was, and also there were very few people doing it, so it was easier to make a name. And there was a moment, 2003, 2004, 2005, when particularly smaller publications, which often adopt new things first, they began to think, oh, we need bloggers. And so I got an internship with the Washington Monthly, and then subsequently, when I left college, a fellowship with the American Prospect, which is actually, when I moved here, right across the street from where we are now, like literally, like you could see it from the window. And that's a small policy magazine out of DC. And that's where I really learned to be a journalist. That's where I learned how to structure stories and how to report. And a lot of what I did and why I got hired by the Post was I was one of a pretty early group of bloggers who was able to take some kind of a job in journalism and begin to integrate the skill sets. So I was a blogger who knew how to journalism, or I was a journalist who knew how to blog, and that became a valuable kind of union of abilities.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously, like you said, American Prospect, Wonk blog, which became the most popular blog on the Post.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, it was awesome. I don't know. Anybody read the Wonk blog still?
Yeah, Wonk blog's great still.
Do you read it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Don't not cheer for Wonk blog. I didn't ask you not to cheer for Wonk. Cheer for Wonk blog.
Remember what we practiced, guys. Anyways, so after that, then. What's interesting about this with now comes in Vox, right? You pitched Vox to Washington Post. Obviously, they didn't counteroffer, and then were you shopping this around, and then Vox Media picked it up, and then in comes Vox? Yeah.
So the way it worked was this idea developed with a couple folks, but primarily my ultimate co-founder is Melissa Bell, who is a colleague of mine at the Washington Post and is now the publisher of Vox Media, and Matt Iglesias, who I started blogging because I loved Matt Iglesias' blog. And I kept blogging because he linked to me, and he helped get me the job at the American Prospect. I owe my career to Matt in a profound way and learned a tremendous amount from him over the years and continue to. And now, when I moved to town at the American Prospect, we sit in front of each other. It's adorable. But we began to develop this idea. And it was an idea about how could you do contextual information differently. I covered all these policy topics, and something you learned covering these policy topics is that people are very rarely asking you the question, what happened today in Obamacare? They're usually asking you the question, what is Obamacare? How do the subsidies work? What? What is going on here? And the news as an industry was built to deliver you the newest thing, the thing that just happened, the iterative movement in the story. And so we began to get obsessed with this idea of how could you build an informational architecture around news where it gave people enough information to always be getting up to speed. So if you were coming into a story later, and we are all always coming into stories later, you weren't lost. Because we lose, I'd say, most of the potential news audience by losing them immediately. They come in, they begin reading. I began reading the news more or less after 9/11. I remember I couldn't understand shit. I didn't know who Tom Daschle was, I didn't know what a Senate minority leader was. Even where I could literally read the words, they didn't mean anything to me. I understood 40% of a news article, then I kept reading for a year, and then I understood 55% of a news article, and it wasn't good. There was no way to catch up. So then newspapers, magazines, we all went online, but we didn't change what we were doing in any fundamental way, so there's still no way to catch up. And so the question we were asking is, how do you create ways to catch up? How do you make it so that the burden is not on you to have known everything that happened before today? So we developed this idea, And we developed this idea when Don Graham owned the Post. And Don Graham, is the jam. And if you guys haven't had him here, you should. He's like an American hero sort of human being. And I thought, if I'm being totally blunt, I think there was a structure at the Post company then that would have made more sense for something like this. The Post had Slate, it had foreign policy, it had The Root, it had a bunch of things that were separate from the Washington Post. So there was an internal company structure that might have made sense. But while we were developing this idea, the Post got sold to Jeff Bezos. And Bezos did not buy those other pieces of architecture. He did buy some offshoots of the Post like Express, but he did not buy Slate, he did not buy foreign policy, he did not buy the things that were not the Post. He bought the things that fed out of the Post. And so it was actually clear to me immediately that that wasn't going to work. Okay. When we went to Katharine Graham, who was the president, I believe, publisher? I think she was a publisher. My understanding of what happened is that she basically went to Bezos and was like, the recommendation was no. And something I always really want to be careful to say is she was right. Mm-hmm. She was right for the Washington Post, and she was probably right for us. And the reason she was right is that Bezos was coming in and he was going to give this brand that, if I remember, it was not financially strong at that moment. Yeah. And rich owners come in journalism and there is only so much runway. To have diverted that investment into this other idea would have been a form of malpractice.
You asked for like $10 million, right?
No, we didn't actually.
Oh, you didn't? Okay. Let's fake
Here I will tell the story of how this came about, because it has always bugged me. So I got a call from the New York Times, and the New York Times said, "I heard you asked for $25 million," and it's actually unclear to me what I would have done with like build like a Scrooge McDuck style gold coin pool. Like young journals are just not that expensive, like not in year one of an organization. So we did not ask for 25 million. So the New York Times had heard I had. So I was like, that's absurd, like ridiculous. So then they came out and they said it was 8 figures. So then people reinterpreted 8 figures to 10 million.
10 million, okay.
But I never knew where $25 million came from. And I'm going to out her. And Melissa Bell, if you are watching, and you're not, but because I'm saying this, you might hear that this has happened. It came out much later that Melissa was asked by someone in the newsroom, "I heard Ezra asked for $50 million. And she's like, "That's absurd." And they're like, "What's it?" She's like, $25 million, because she was joking. But the people didn't know it was a joke, because she's bad at that joke. She's usually good at it, but in that case, not good. That clearly got passed to the New York Times, who assumed I was now lying to them, fudged it, and 10 million. We did not ask for $10 million. We also did not expect to lose millions, right? Like, there's also this question of revenues. We've been profitable since about 1.5 years in.
Okay.
We are not a, sorry, this is a sore point to me. It's a stupid story.
So you approached Vox Media, and
no.
So my question here I wanted to ask is,
I was answering the first internal
but
question capsule.
Okay. So did you approach Vox Media and say, "Hey, we want to do a new, publication," and they're like, "What's the name?" You're like, "Vox."
No.
Did you purposely do that?
We were resistant to that name, actually. But
Okay.
The story is this. So we were basically talking to different people. We talked to venture capitalists. We talked to established media organizations. We talked to a lot of different players who could fund something like this. We thought of bootstrapping it. These were all very live options on the table. One thing that happened pretty early in this process was Vox Media, before we were shopping it, had through an intermediary told Melissa they were interested in could we ever work with Ezra? I don't exactly remember how this happened, but it came to us that they were interested in starting a news vertical. Mm-hmm. And then it came back to them because it got to Melissa that actually we were. Yeah. And so in a way, we sort of approached each other. And it was a little bit, I think, earlier than Vox. If you have Jim here, he'll tell you this. Yeah. A little earlier than they intended to do this. Yeah. but we were on the market and had a very fully formed idea. And they, from like the moment we met them, I mean, we had to kind of try not to show our hand too much and be coy and stuff, but it was completely clear it was a right home. We had a really strong editorial vision. What we did not have was a strong product team, which is hard to build. We had Melissa, who's an incredible product manager, and Yuri Victor, who is an incredible product developer now at the New York Times. But we didn't have a fully built out. We didn't have a CTO, we didn't have any of that, and we didn't have a business side. And so they had all that in a really great way. And Jim Bankoff, who's been here, he wanted us to be named Vox. And we said to him, that's very nice, but we could be a total fucking disaster. And then we've tarnished the name of your company forever. And Jim said, I'm sure that won't happen. And we said, well, that's nice, but we went back and forth for all, and eventually we took the name, and it's all been great.
What was the other names you guys were considering?
We never did. We always called it internally as Project X, and externally, because I'm an old comic book fan. But because we never had to worry about a name, naming anything is the worst part. Yeah. It is not clear to me if the upside of launching products just in general in life is worth the downside of having to come up with a name for them. I would say it probably usually isn't, so you really need a good idea. Yeah. But when there was a name on the table, we weren't going to screw around trying to find another one.
So what I thought was really interesting here is because I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs in this room. One of the things that they're always grappling with is, can I create an internal project with the company I'm working for now? Or would I like to spin this out and actually make this into a startup, like my own startup? What was like having this? I mean, I know you told me there was Vox Media already had the CTO and had all the structure in there, but did it cross your mind that you wanted to spin this out, get your own funding, and create this like a Vice Media? Like Vice is its own kind of company, and Vox could have been its own thing.
Yeah. I didn't see the choice like that. I mean, one, I believe Vox is its own company as a division of Vox Media. Jim's philosophy, and I did a lot of due diligence on this before we went with them, but I have never gotten any editorial interference from Jim, ever. Ever. He has had enormous trust in us, and I think that we have developed Vox exactly the way we wanted to develop it. If I hadn't thought that would have been true, obviously it might not have been true, but if I hadn't thought it was, I wouldn't have gone there. When we were thinking about this, we wanted to do something pretty hard. It's still hard. I'm not saying I don't think we've achieved what we wanted to do, right? We're hopefully on the path, but it's a long way away. The question in our minds was, what gives us the best chance of success? And we thought that being at Vox Media would let us focus on the parts of the project that we really needed to focus on. A world in which our attention was really on building a business side and I don't think that would have been, I think it would have been much more difficult. Now, there are times, I actually want to make a pitch to some degree for another piece of this, which is the Post was also, they have and had a really good culture of creating internal startups. So I think oftentimes people underestimate the ability to innovate within larger organizations that you're already in. I think it would have been really foolish to start Vox before I had learned how to build at WonkBlog, learned how to manage at WonkBlog. I think there are often reasons to go off and do your own thing, but there are also reasons to partner and to take advantage of structures that are there. And for us at this point, it made sense.
So when you guys launched Vox, did you guys have, hundreds of articles already ready to fire off? Like what was like the first?
The day we turn on the lights?
Yeah, turn on the lights.
Like, on the main site?
Explain that first day.
We probably launched with, 12 articles, something like that. I mean, we were ready and we had things for the next day and the day after that, but it wasn't like a month of content. I mean, a shitty thing about the news is that it keeps changing every day, and so it's hard to predict it. But we launched with a set of pieces that we felt spoke to what the site was going to be. We were pretty ruthless about cutting. We wanted to put our best face forward at the launch, and it I think worked. But yeah, it wasn't like we had built up 3 months of inventory. That we were not big enough. I mean, we ran and continue to this day to run staff-wise well behind how big we are. So we are always overworked and overtired and don't have enough people to complete what we need to be doing. So the idea that we are always building to the future, but the idea that we have a ton of redundancy in the system, pieces for 3 weeks down the line planned, it's a little bit more seat of the pants than that.
So obviously you guys are known for, you guys sort of started a trend in journalism, and it's called the explanatory journalism. Can you explain what explanatory journalism is, no pun intended?
Explanatory journalism explained. I'd be happy to. So any journalistic organization, any journalistic product can be built to highlight something. So most journalism that people are familiar with, newspapers, is built to highlight news. Everything is designed to get you the core piece of news as fast as it fucking can, right? Reverse pyramid style. It actually, the way these things are written, reverse pyramid, which I still teach in journalism school, it's written that way because when it was being sent across the country on telegraph lines, you would drop some of it. And so it would be in order. So if you dropped like paragraphs 8 through 12 of a 12-paragraph story, you still got the important part in there. Like that is what reverse pyramid is. The New Yorker is built to showcase narrative long-form journalism. There's an incredible amount of work that goes into thinking about how to present the story there, how to guide you through the story, how to make sure you hear parts in the right order so the tension builds, and you can go on and on and on like this. Explanatory journalism is built to surface context, first and foremost. So when there is a piece of breaking news, and we do something like, today we had this stabilization deal that's not going to pass, but for Obamacare. When we do that, the news is like there's this deal. That is not for us the part we are showcasing. The story is built to tell you what you need to know to understand that deal. And that means you have to be able to stop and back up, to move out of order, to say, okay, this is interesting, but actually to understand it, you need to go back to how subsidies worked in the first place. Or to say you need to pivot and understand a different topic here before we can really get you where you need to go on this. Everything from our videos to our text, card stacks, our podcasts, we are thinking about how to be able to stop in a story and instead of linearly making an argument or just showcasing a piece of news, how to give you topic knowledge so all that news makes sense. One way I often put it is that you can think of a new piece of news like a piece of a puzzle. What we are trying to do is actually show you the other pieces of the puzzle, and that often means de-emphasizing this one. What we want you to know is oh, there's a sailboat, not hey, there's a new piece of red. And that's not to take anything away from breaking news. Actually, breaking news is incredibly important. I'm a big fan, actually, Axios, which is a new entrant on the scene. I really like them. There's a real clarity of vision there. And there's a clarity of vision there that I think is useful because they're actually, in a way, our opposite. Axios is built to not waste a moment of your time with extraneous information. They get in and they get out faster than anybody in the game. It's really cool, actually, just how sharp that theory is. We're literally the opposite. Something new happens, we are not trying to tell you it happened as quickly as possible. We are trying to tell you everything else that the experts already know so that you can understand that new thing. And that is a lot of editorial work and planning. It makes what we do internally more different than I think people realize. When we do it well, it feels very seamless externally. But now having watched 150 people-ish come into Vox, very, very, very hard to do and very hard to learn. And sometimes people don't, right? It's a way of thinking. You have to be able, for instance, to identify the question where if you answer it one way or another, the whole issue turns. Right? You have to find what that question is, the hinge question. There's all this work that needs to be done, and we are an organization built around that thing, and that means we are not as good at other things. To this day, we do not have a big aggregation breaking news team. We just don't. We've not built it because it's not what we're designed to do first and foremost. We have people who do the news, we have some general assignment reporters, but other places specialize in these things, and they're the best at it. We, in order to do this, have to specialize in another thing and be the best at that. But it requires those choices.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned about Axios because we're getting Roy Schwartz in March. He's confirmed. So I want to regurgitate what you just said. It's is it true? But so that's great. I like how you talk about getting a large amount of information and condense it in a small amount of time. I always say that this is sort of like the Khan Academy for politics. Like you guys, you know how Sam Khan, he makes it really very understandable. So my
I'm
question.
going to put that on the Wikipedia page.
You want to do that? Yeah, I can. If you make me a contributor, I'll put it in there. So you've done a lot of these videos. So what is your favorite video for you?
The Syrian Civil War explained in 7 minutes.
Okay, so that's the one that's the most popular, right? Has anybody seen that? The Syrian? Yeah, it's really amazing.
You've all seen it. It's been watched 120 million. You've seen it.
100 million, right.
Don't play coy. I love that piece. And the reason I love that piece is that, I don't think there's anything you can watch or even read that will as sharply explain the Syrian Civil War as that. But it is originally 5. We've built it out over time to 7 minutes. It is 7 minutes on the internal dynamics of that war that has been watched more than 100 million times. Like, that is our mission happening in real time.
Right.
I don't have the pieces that are good but don't reach people. They didn't achieve the mission.
Yeah, but the rap explainer video was.
That's a fucking amazing piece.
Did you guys see that one? It's really amazing.
Yeah, the rap explainer video. Estelle Coswell is a genius.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a lot of great stuff,
Yeah.
but the reason Syrian Civil War is because that's a complicated, super important topic. It reached a massive, massive audience, and I think it really helped people understand one of the central issues of the day.
So what I really like about the explainer videos is that you watch it and then you feel like you're an expert now, because
That's the hope.
The Syrian one was like, it's just like, this is the reason why Russia and the United States is fighting against opposite side, and then you like kind of zoom out, and then after 5 minutes you're like, oh shit, like this is what's happening.
There's a joke we tell internally. Although now, I love Vox Media. If you go to the Vox Media website and watch the promotional video for the whole company, you can hear Joe Posner say it. But one of our now editor-in-chief's friends, Lauren Williams' friends, once said to her that what they liked about Vox was you're like, what the fuck? And Vox is like, here's the fuck.
Tweet that out, guys.
And I can say it publicly because it's part of now our official promotional materials. And that's there's a philosopher who once said that, I don't remember his name actually, but the feeling of a good explanation is a feeling of a key turning in a lock. An explanation is not a bunch of definitions. It's not a bunch of information about what's going on. An explanation is you come out with a model that allows you to turn the thing around in your own head, that allows new things to make sense. This is what was different about the way we did it. A lot of explainers before us, we did not invent explainers, but explainers were designed for people. It was very weird. It's like you wrote explainers and the idea of the audience was somebody who wants to know about this topic, but doesn't want to know very much. Like, explainers were for the part of the audience we thought was low information, not that bright. And we came in, and the idea of the explainers was, if you want to know about it, you really want to know. Like, you want to go away feeling like an expert. You want to go away with that power over the news. And so we fail at this all the time. It's hard to do. I'm not telling you we've cracked the code in every case, but at our best, when you walk away from our explainers, be they text or video or audio or whatever, you walk away and you see how the machine works. You get it. You don't just know what the words mean. You don't just know some facts about it. You don't just know what just happened. You see how the pieces fit together, and so then you can see what's happening in them. And that's an explanation. And that's what that video does well. It's what Estelle's rap video does well. It's what a lot of our best work does well.
What I really love about Vox and you.
I'm enjoying this interview tremendously, I want you to know.
Really?
Yeah, this is great. I like all the compliments. It's great.
Well, talk about compliments. I wanted to ask about the 4 Emmy nominations and
let's keep going. This is I got all night.
Which video was it? The 4 nominations.
Estelle got 2. I think for that series, although possible one of them was for one of the videos, but I think for the series, which included that rap video, and Johnny Harris, who was behind the Syria video, he got one for not Borders, but another one of his international documentaries, one about Rio. And we distributed a series called The Secret Life of Muslims, which also got a nomination. But that was really exciting.
So this is. I mean, I work with startups all the time, and one of the things that I see consistently is you'll have like a technical guy, like, hey, I have an app, right? But he doesn't have the, so they always say hacker, hustler, hipster. And, hacker is obviously the developer, hustler is the business guy, and hipster is the creative guy, right? It's the product guy.
Huh, I've never heard that.
Right. So I see you as the product guy. Like you're the ones who you're the one that had the vision of the product, and you had to create Vox because that was really the only way you could do it to manifest your idea, your product. And then for Emmy's nomination later, the product stands for itself, right?
Yeah, although, I'll say on this, I think I'm probably, I don't want to say it, I don't want to choose between the children, but I'm really, really proud of our video team because I didn't have as much to do with it. So here's a secret to building an amazing video team. Hire Joe Posner, Joss Fong, Johnny Harris, and Estelle Coswell in that order. And it's going to work out, I promise. But that team grew up at Vox. I had done cable news, but I'm not a visual thinker at all. And we gave them a lot of support, and for a long time I was a script editor with them. I was involved, but I didn't do it. I like in the text I'm really there. I'm editing stories, I'm assigning them, I'm writing them, I get the whole thing. It all comes out on the other side a little bit like magic to me. And what they did was they took the mission we created together. Joe Posner's a founding member. Actually, we released a video before we ever released a text article. And they reinterpreted it. They understood what we were, and they took it in their own direction. And the video team is different than the text team, which is different than the audio team. They have different priorities, different things come first for them. But they're like a startup of their own. And we've actually tried to do that with each new thing we do, create it to be a startup of its own. What we did not do very purposefully was we didn't create a video team that had to do articles. A lot of video teams at other publications, the way they work is that they basically get assigned articles to turn into videos. The video team was built to create videos. It never had to work with an article ever if it didn't want to create a visual language first. But the reason I'm really proud of that is that it's the values of the organization, the approach of the organization, things in some ways that I at least helped set into motion, but taken further than I ever could have taken it. There is no part of me that in a million years could have created Rap Explained, Hip Hop Explained. That video from Estelle, that is a genius I do not possess. And it is her taking this thing and building on it in her own way. And that to me, when that began happening, when I began really seeing those kinds of reinterpretations, that's when I began to feel like Vox had become a success. And that took a while to feel that way. It actually was a long time before I began to feel really proud of what we had done. Long time before I felt not completely in limbo. There's a lot of fear when you start something like this, a lot of feeling of fragility. But it was when I saw that there was a culture that people could use to create something new and amazing that I could never have created, that's when it felt like we had done something special.
So I love what you talked about with the whole process of the creative process. And in fact, did a little bit of research on this with your video team. Like you just said, it was its own team, right? So you had a team that was 12, went up to 20 staffers, and then the video and the writers. So when they say writers, it's actually the journalists writing articles. 60% of the video pieces were actually original by the video team, which I thought was really, really interesting. Yeah. And I like that what you mentioned with values. So I wanted to go into that, core values of Vox. So I know you mentioned
Explain the news.
Explain the news.
Actually, not always the news, sometimes the world.
But don't you have three, I did some
yes,
research.
Definitely.
You have three.
But I feel like you're eliciting something and I've forgotten what it is.
Okay.
What are my three values?
So you mentioned speed, length, and persistence.
Oh, so those are the ways.
Has that changed?
I wouldn't call those values.
Okay.
Those are the ways in which we think digital media is different than its predecessors, speed, length, and persistence.
Okay.
You can move faster, you can have things of any length because they don't take time away from other things. I always say this as a joke, but it's true. You guys read Clickhole? Yeah. All right, it's like the Onion spin-off that makes fun of BuzzFeed, basically. And sometimes Vox. And they had this one article that's like, my time on a whaling ship completely changed my life, was the headline. And it was just like the entire text of Moby Dick.
I saw that, yeah. I saw that.
And on the one hand, I tell that and everybody laughs because it's a funny joke. And on the other hand, think about that. Like, they published the entire text of Moby Dick, and then everything else they wanted to publish that day, and videos. You could not have, like, Moby Dick's, I don't know if you've all read it. It's long. It's a long book. And then persistence, things are there forever. You can activate them whenever. But those are not values for us. I would say that our values are explanatory journalism. Like, that's really important to us. There's a deep, I actually give this presentation to new members of the staff about what makes Vox different. I'm trying to remember what I have in this presentation. I should know. But that we focus on explaining the news, that we try to always have respect for the audience, and we always try to imagine an audience. There's a line I love, and I heard it actually, my mother sent me once a video of a CBS News correspondent named Eric Severide's sign off, his final comments on CBS, and he said, "I have tried never to underestimate the audience's intelligence nor overestimate their information." And so we try really hard to always simultaneously believe that the audience is incredibly smart and they may not have been following the story at all. And like, that's okay. And we keep those things together at all times. That visual journalism is integrated into the organization at its base level. That visual journalism is journalism, and audio journalism is journalism, and written journalism is journalism, and it's all just toolkits. These are not like support desks. That's a very important part of our culture. And then there are a couple other things, but those are big things that I think actually make Vox different. And then the place where those three come in is remembering that we are trying to figure out a new technology. We often say internally that if you can print out Vox, staple it together, and put it on somebody's doorstep, we fucked up. Like, if it makes sense, it doesn't work. Like, that means we're not using the new technology.
So talking about new technology, I mean, there's a slew of them, right? There's Facebook Live, Snapchat, Instagram Stories. Do you have any affinity to any of those? I mean, have you tried putting news on those platforms?
We have put news on all of those platforms.
Okay. So I mean, what have you learned? Like, because each of those
that
platforms
every platform you need to reinvent yourself for it.
Okay.
That what doesn't work is saying, we are Vox, we're just going to go take what we're doing and move it over to Instagram Story. It's not very clear what that would even mean, but people do it all the time. Not maybe with Instagram Stories, but with video is a really good example of a place where people do that. Or a lot of organizations, when they went into podcasting, what they did was they took themselves and they said, I don't want to name any names here, so I won't, but they said, here is brand name podcast. And the point there is like, it's us, we're here now, doing what we do. And when we went into podcasting, we really looked and said, okay, what is a product that makes sense for podcasting, that needs to be there, that has a market there? And we looked, our first podcast was The Weeds, and it's our first podcast because it's intimately connected, one, to our culture, which is very policy journalism centric. When we cover politics, we cover it through the lens of policy. But two, we looked at podcasting and realized nobody in it was doing policy. There wasn't a policy podcast at that point, at least not of the kind we did. So in every one of these places, Instagram Stories, we did Snapchat Discover, we are on YouTube, like we really go in and ask how to create a new version of ourselves for that space, how to reinterpret our values for that space. We are not, this is super, super important for our culture. Like, we are not a text news operation that does video. We are an explanatory news operation that tries to do its work wherever our audience is to be found. Mm-hmm. We are building a TV show right now, we're building a daily podcast right now, and each one of these is a new reinvention. Mm-hmm. It is for that place intimately, and it means that we do not let it be held back by the rest of the organization. Like, for instance, we've been doing these interviews for our daily podcast as we staff it up. I'm super excited about. And a question we keep getting is, okay, like, how does it integrate with the Vox newsroom? And I don't think I'm revealing a great secret here. One thing that we've been very clear on is, like, you are not limited to the Vox newsroom. You do not have to just talk to people at Vox. Like, you are here to create the best podcast you possibly can. If that means talking to somebody from the New York Times, go do that. If that means talking to somebody from the Post, go do that. This is here to be a product that serves a podcast audience the absolute best, and Vox will prosper and get better as we do that. If we try to make it a promo machine for other parts of Vox, we are going to fail.
So there was another platform you didn't mention, and I'm
Not because I don't love it.
No. But so, what's your opinion about Twitter, and what's your opinion about Twitter in a Donald Trump world?
I already told you guys about Twitter. I love new 280 character Twitter because and everybody hates me on Twitter for it now because all my things are too long. But
in a Donald Trump world. Well, actually,
well,
before,
I mean,
did I get you going?
everything in a Donald Trump world is a little bit infected with his toxicity. He uses Twitter, I mean, sometimes for perfectly banal purposes, but sometimes to be cruel, sometimes to bully, sometimes to lie, to stoke cultural controversy, to stoke racial controversy, to create enemies, to undermine the media, to question whether we should have a First Amendment. It's not Twitter's fault. He's doing it on everything else. He's doing it in press conferences. I mean, it's not something unique to Twitter. But I will say that I do think that I don't think the conversation, the political conversation that has been on Twitter until now has been great. And actually one reason I like the longer Twitter is that I think 140 characters, you can tell a joke in 140 characters. It's hard to say much more than that. And obviously people do these like threads, right? Like, 140 characters, 1 of 47, right? Like that happens. Yeah. I've done it. I'm not casting any stones. But I don't think Twitter has made us better versions of ourselves as journalists. I think it's pushed a lot of quippy, snarky, like try to get likes from your friends, try to write for each other until you go a little bit too far and get like hung out to dry. And then I think Trump came in, and there is I don't want to say he's a role model, but when the president is modeling a certain kind of behavior, it normalizes it throughout the system. And there's just a lot more like of all of us journalists, including me, like tweeting out like sad exclamation. I mean, he sets up a kind of discourse in which it's become journalists on Twitter are much more unleashed in the age of Trump. They're much more aggressive. They're much more, it's funny because I've never been a fan of quote unquote objective journalism because I don't believe in it. I don't believe it exists. There's a Hunter S. Thompson line that he only ever saw objective journalism on a closed circuit camera at a Woolworths, which I've always liked. Now people work very hard to do fair journalism. I do believe in that. But the change in how journalists and everybody talk in politics on Twitter in the age of Trump has been pretty profound. And it's part because of what he does. There are complicated reasons about who's telling you what. It's much easier to say for journalists to say, this guy's unfit to serve when they're hearing it from both Republicans and Democrats, right? They will go further because they're much more protected. They're speaking off of a kind of consensus. It isn't a partisan opinion if you're hearing it from both sides, which we all are. But he's also created more space to just be mean. If the president is creating a mean political discourse, the whole discourse becomes meaner. I think a lot these days about how much effort President Obama put in to modulating cultural conflict. I was just reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, We Were 8 Years in Power, which I recommend. And he talks a lot about all these racial controversies that came up in Obama's presidency, and I had forgotten a number of them, and how hard Obama worked to try to bring down the temperature and not bring it up. I remember you mentioned that we interviewed President Obama, and I remember preparing for that interview, talking to his staff, like pre-reporting, and talking about terrorism at some point, and hearing them say that they were really afraid that how do you keep people from overreacting after lone wolf gunman attacks? Because that was something you couldn't fully protect against. So how do you keep people from overreacting? And I think about how much effort Trump puts into exacerbating cultural conflict, to making people more afraid than they already were. This is an emotionally fucked up time in politics. It is not one that is making most of us better people. I don't think it's one that's made me a better person. I'm not throwing stones here, but I don't think it's good. I know it sounds fuddy-duddy and like coarsening of the culture. This is not good. We need to breathe a little bit. And it's not Twitter's fault, it's Donald Trump's fault, but it's part of mediums also that make it easier to move fast, and in some ways make you feel like you're missing the whole thing if you stop and think about it.
So it's funny because my coworker, he's a really big fan of yours, and I said
He sounds great.
I said, hey, if you could ask Ezra one question, what would it be? You know what his answer was? It's his question to you was?
Yes, I do want to know.
Are we fucked?
Are we fucked?
Are we fucked?
We're not.
I think you answered it.
I think it always depends what people mean by that. Like, is the American Republic going to collapse? I don't think so. In some ways, we are proving. I go back and forth on this. I just had a conversation with someone about this the other day. Are American institutions proving robust to Trump more than we expected or less? I think a lot of people feel the answer is more, and in some ways that's true. He's been able to do less legislatively than I expected, although, boy, does he try to make it hard for himself. The courts have been very, very effective. The courts have been very strong. The media has been very strong. But Congress, which is the central institution in the American government, it comes first in the Constitution for a reason. What we have found is that if the president is a co-partisan of the majority party in Congress, Congress will not act as a check. Yeah. There is nothing they will not accept, as far as I can tell so far. They all know. I mean, you get Paul Ryan in a room, you get Mitch McConnell in a room, you pump them with sodium. You don't pump them with sodium pentothal. You look in their eyes. Their eyes are always screaming. And I don't say that as an exculpatory thing, because their eyes are screaming and they're sitting there saying, well, I don't comment on what the president says, I comment on what he does. Like, well, you're a real profile in courage, aren't you? The abdication of Congress is really bad. The saving grace of the Trump presidency is that Donald Trump is an incompetent with no attention span. He's a terrible manager. He doesn't learn about things. He is not disciplined enough. He can cause a lot of damage by making mistakes and by escalating. I mean, there's a lot of ways he could cause a lot of damage with North Korea and others. But in terms of like consistently undermining the foundations of American democracy, he's not capable of it, as far as I can tell. He's alienated his own cabinet. His own staff, instead of trying to help him accomplish his goals, is trying to stop him from destroying everything and try to make him as much like a quote-unquote normal Republican as it can. But man, if you had someone who believes what Donald Trump believes and was halfway capable, who was disciplined, who was able to not monologue what they were really thinking, like the dumbest supervillain of all time. I don't know what we have against that. I mean, I had this thought recently that I was thinking about Watergate. I was reading a lot about Watergate. I have no idea why. And I was thinking about Nixon's tapes. Like, how crazy was that? He taped it all. Watergate wouldn't have happened without the tapes. And I thought, well, there's no taping system now. And then Donald Trump went to Lester Holt and was like, just to be clear, the reason I fired James Comey was to impede his investigation of Russia. I know what we said, but no, what we said is a lie. What I did was I was trying to obstruct justice. He is his own tapes. But what if he wasn't? And I don't feel good about the what if he wasn't. The other thing I'll say, and I can tell you want to ask me another question, but I want to keep talking about this one, is that there are things we do that are bad. And then there are things we just don't do that need to happen. Look, I think that the bulk of the evidence is that not only is climate change real, quote unquote, but we're on a really bad path. Like, we're not on a 2 degrees Celsius path, we're on 3.54. And here we are, we have all this evidence. We have cover stories in New York Magazine about how we're going to make the Earth uninhabitable, and we're doing like as a country right now, like trying to stop, like we have a government trying to stop us from doing anything. We are not doing anything near what people say is necessary to do. And we know, and they're gonna know we knew. And like, we thought it was a pain in the ass. And I don't know, we're not fucked. Most of us are gonna be fine. Some of us are fucked. I mean, it's not that nobody's getting deported or if we end up inciting North Korea to attack Seoul, like a lot of people are gonna die. We're not fucked, but we're not okay.
Yeah. Hey, do we have more beer in there? Because I think I totally got this from going. I wanted to go into something a little bit because we're kind of running out of time. A little bit more less serious here, but it's a heavy topic. I know that
I want to remind you, your question was, are we fucked?
Yeah.
You want happier answers, ask me happier questions.
Fair enough. I know that you are very, very big into healthcare, right? I mean, you are like, I mean, you could pretty much like write the policy for healthcare. I mean, is it true you've written 7,000 articles on healthcare, and
I have no idea.
Oh, okay, because you said that a lot over.
It's possible I was exaggerating for comic effect.
And you've read the whole Obamacare.
It's been a bit, but
yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So my question is like,
can I say something about reading the whole Obamacare bill?
Yeah.
I don't recommend doing that. It's not useful. Reading bill language, it's fine. But like bills are not written that way. They're not written to be read like that. That's not what statutory writing is. It's a lot of like subparagraph A, B, C, and D2 of this other bill. There's this whole thing that emerged. Members of Congress don't read bills. They read people explaining what the bills do. It's not like they write them either. There's like a team that turns what they're trying to do into legislative language. This is one of these stupid like gotcha things that came up over the last couple of years and is a pure bad faith hypocritical piece of shit argument by people who do not follow it in their own lives. When you hear somebody say like, did they read the bill? Like, ask like, did you read the last appropriations writer said? And the answer is no. People should stop saying that.
Right. You want the mic? Here we go. So if you were president, how would you restructure the healthcare?
Do I have system? What does Congress look like?
I don't know. It's Democratic Congress.
Look, there's the question of like, if I am emperor with my magic wand, right? And I would just probably say, okay, we're going to take France's system and put it here. And even that would be hard because payment structures and whatever. But there's the reality of like, we're building on the structure we have. We're building on the system we have. People rely on these rural hospitals that are not capable of sustaining their operations if we bring down payment rates to things that Canada uses or that England uses or that France uses. I think it would not be possible. No, actually, having watched the Republicans come up with a bunch of bills this year, it is possible to design a system worse than the one we have. You can do that if you put your mind to it. But virtually any system that any other country has makes more sense than ours does, and you would just import it as much as you could and try to manage disruption. But I may be overly so. This is a criticism people make of me, and I'm not sure it's wrong. I do think being careful about disruption is something that you really do need to think about. We have a country where people don't trust each other. We have a country where healthcare is very personal. The idea that you're going to change things all at once on everybody, I don't think it works. I think it's a very, very tough sell. So like there's this idea of like, well, what if you could just write the law, but driving things forward without any kind of public buy-in is tough. I mean, Obamacare was a pretty modest bill so far as bills to do this kind of thing go. And even that was, I mean, we're whatever it is, however many years later, it's still the most polarizing issue or one of them in American life. So you're constrained, but it's not in any way difficult to design a better system. Like you pick, like Canada, fine. Like France, fine. Like I often get into fights with single payer people. Often I think get into fights with me is actually why I put that because I have concerns about basic disruption. But would I like snap my fingers and put the Canadian system in place in America tomorrow? Hell yeah! Like yes, it's much better. It's not even close. The hard part with anything is that from here to there.
I see. Okay. And so actually, I thought that was really interesting how you were able to get Obama to talk about Obamacare with your interview with him, right? So I wanted to ask, like, I mean, how did you guys even get him to do an interview with Vox? I mean, that was pretty amazing.
I mean, there's a lot of blackmailing the people around him first,
Okay.
and then
Okay,
eventually you get up to the top.
Got it.
That was our second interview with him.
Yeah.
So we had done one. We were the first digital-only news outlet, to my knowledge, to ever interview a sitting president, which is cool. That was a couple years ago now. Really, you want to see a cool video? Like, I think what we did with how that looked, it doesn't look like any presidential interview you've ever seen. I'm really proud of the aesthetics of that interview. When he was leaving, I mean, the way we've gotten, I think this is true for all news organizations, the way you get a presidential interview is you push for a long time. I mean, that Obamacare interview was a year in the making, something like that, pushing, like, hey, like, this is a big issue, like, we would like to interview about it, and you hear no a lot, and then eventually you ask at a point in time when they're like, we would like to talk about Obamacare. I think the reason that he talked with us about it was that we have covered Obamacare's failures and successes, but they know we take it very seriously. And I think that they wanted to have a pretty deep conversation about healthcare, and if you want to do that, you want to talk to Sarah Cliff. If you don't just want to have a superficial conversation about it. And I think that we were able to get out of him an articulation of the way he thought about healthcare and the way he thought about Obamacare and its problems that other people had not been able to until that point. I'm very proud of that interview, actually.
Are you more proud of that interview than your Playboy interview?
No, I'm much more proud of my personal Playboy interview than interviewing the president.
Okay, yes.
No.
Actually, that was really cool, though. Like, I mean, no, I'm not seriously though, because like, in the interview you said, not to pivot here really quick, but it was really interesting when you said that in high school you weren't very popular. You were sort of overwhelmed.
I was extremely unpopular.
You had long hair. You had a GPA of what?
2.2.
2.2, and here you are in Playboy. So, do you have any words to say to your bullies in high school? Like, you're being interviewed by Playboy,
The Playboy interview is cool. It was weird, but they do great interviews. That was a fun one to do because they take the time. Like, I joke with people, like, I only read Playboy for the articles about me. But so, at some point, I stepped down as editor-in-chief recently and gave Lauren Williams my office because I have like a newsroom desk now, like a lowly reporter. And I hadn't gotten all my stuff out, and there was just a box in the corner that I had forgotten about. At some point, she's like, I moved the box out of the corner. I was like, oh yeah, what was in it? She's like, just a lot of Playboys. I was like, well, that just sentence on its own doesn't sound great for me. But yeah, that was cool.
So we're running out of time. We're almost an hour here.
I will say, sorry, even though we're running out of time, the funny thing about that interview, I don't know, where do you all have to be? What do you mean we're running out of time? Is if you look at it online and you go to the bottom, they took a video of me doing the interview, but they just shot the interview like I'm like a beautiful model. And so it's like a lot of I'm answering some question about comic books, and it's like these lingering side shots of my face, and I'm walking down a hallway, but as if it is the most awkward thing you will ever watch. I regret bringing it up.
We'll keep that in mind when we're interviewed by
Great.
Playboy. Okay, so I mean, this is a technology forum here, so I wanted to get before my two last questions. I want to talk about mega trends in technology. I know that you're very bullish on. I mean, you had said you were very bullish on VR.
I am bullish. Well, bullish/afraid.
Afraid?
Yes.
Okay. So
I don't believe really in the artificial intelligence dystopia.
Okay.
I don't think the AI is going to come, replicate itself a million times stronger in 45 minutes, then decide it creates paper clips and we're all going to be paper clipped out of existence. And I'm not trying to be too dismissive. I don't buy that as I don't think the AI is going to come and kill us. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that people don't quite realize that we have already invented VR. I don't think society is prepared for that. And I think the world of Ready Player One, where people like decide to spend all their time in these not that expensive consumer electronics rigs as opposed to working shitty jobs is not implausible to me. I mean, you see in Japan, I'm not going to come up with the word right now, but you have those, like that shut-in culture. Hikikomori? Hikikomori. I like put on that VR rig, I was like, oh, maybe I'm just not going to come back out. Like maybe this is, I mean, and it's not just games, it's communication in it is really powerful. There's a reason Facebook bought Oculus. They had a little demo where like you communicate with a little alien dude whose eyes track you. And it was amazing how powerful that effect was. That, I think the way to think about VR, actually the way to think about a fair amount of consumer electronics, but particularly VR, is to think about the economic analysis you apply to heroin. Or to some other kind of drug, but an addictive drug. The thing about addictive recreational drugs, which you shouldn't do, you should do non-addictive recreational drugs. The thing about addictive recreational drugs is people will do a lot to get them, but we make the cost of getting them very high. And while there is a financial incentive to try to make them better, we try to arrest the people who use it. So like we're in some kind of constant war with that. And I'm not saying it's a good war, I'm not saying we do it well, but there's clearly some kind of societal sanction that is being built in. It makes it hard to do, you have to work at it. We encourage consumer electronics makers to make their products constantly better and more addictive. We reward them for it, and they are good at it. Like smartphones have, I mean, I go into the bathroom and people are constantly on their phones at the urinals. Like constant, like it's not that long. And you could try, it's not a, VR, 30 years down the road, 50 years down the road. I mean, have you guys seen reality? It's garbage. Like that's gonna be really good. And I do worry, like I don't know that we're built for it. We are running this tremendous experiment on ourselves in real time. Like we are the first generation that didn't have smartphones and then did, right? Like in high school, I did not. Like I didn't have a phone at all when I was a freshman, and then like there came a point in my life when I had an iPhone. Like no one else will remember that. And VR, it's, I don't know, like we don't know I'm amazed at how addicted I am to my phone, how much when I try to stop it, I can't, how much like I can feel it in me like calling me constantly. There might be something a little bit better than this. Mm-hmm. VR is gonna be that times 10,000, and I think it's gonna be tough.
Okay. Dude, I had like tons of questions and I went through like maybe like 10% of it. So I'm gonna wrap it up here, and I have two more questions here to ask you. We usually do Q&A, but we don't have time for that. So these two questions. If you could rewind back time 10 years ago, 10, is that good? What would be the best piece of advice you would have given yourself now that you're here? Would have been.
I hear this question comes up. There are podcasts I like that ask it. Tim Ferriss's podcast is always asking a question like this. And the answer is always the same. Like somebody is always saying, I would have told myself to enjoy it. I want to be clear about this. It's not like I've not told myself to enjoy it. It's just that I don't. Like the reason nobody's enjoying it is like we're all human. It's hard. Like the hedonic treadmill is a real thing. I don't think there's some kind of advice that if I'd given it to myself, it would have altered. And the path I've been on, I'm not unhappy with. So I don't know. There have been bad parts, but I think the hard part about advice is not getting good advice. Like there's a lot of good advice out there. The hard part about advice is following it and experiencing it and like changing habits. So I've been waiting to offer this critique of this question for a long time, so I appreciate you giving me the option.
Sure. Is it all?
That's it.
Okay, so one last question. This is probably the hardest question. I always ask all of our guests this question. Ready?
Yes.
So, who is your favorite superhero and why?
Favorite's tough. It's not,
Okay, when you
I
were
don't think
young.
that's the way to think about it. When I was young, Adam Warlock.
Okay. Why?
Because the Infinity Gauntlet series is awesome. Do you have an Adam Warlock
No, I
figurine
don't.
back there? Because that would have been very good. Yeah, Adam Warlock, but it's unclear why. He's just a kind of weird cosmic entity.
So actually, I got the answer from your Playboy interview. It is Adam Warlock.
Oh, thank you. That's very good.
So that's our last question. Thanks for coming out, ladies and gentlemen. Ezra Klein.